Bem-vindos a mais este Conversas com História. Este é um ciclo de história pública onde nós procuramos debater assuntos que são fulcrais à sociedade hoje, ou desafios, ou dúvidas, ou inquietações, e tentar olhá-los com um conteúdo histórico, com contraditório, com polémica, divulgando assim a história e também o pensamento crítico. Hoje eu tenho aqui o prazer de ter comigo a Jessa Crispin, que hoje partilha a sua vida entre os Estados Unidos e a Alemanha, particularmente Berlim. Ela está aqui hoje conosco porque tem sido uma das vozes que mais tem debatido a questão feminina a partir de uma perspectiva muito crítica do feminismo atual. Um dos seus livros mais importantes é justamente o I Am Not a Feminist, e foi precedido por outros dois livros, um deles que foi justamente a sua experiência de um certo autoexílio, ou de um exílio não totalmente imposto, quando mudou para a Europa. A Jessa Crispin tem uma história que começa justamente numa ONG de luta pelos direitos reprodutivos, nomeadamente pelo direito ao aborto nos Estados Unidos, e tornou-se autora de um blog muito destacado, que veio em todos os jornais de referência mundiais, o Bookslut, onde fazia crítica literária, e nós hoje também vamos olhar um bocadinho para esse lado, porque justamente um dos seus trabalhos foi direcionado aos autores que tinham crises de abstinência de escrita, tinham bloqueios de escrita criativa. Yes, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm sorry I've done this presentation in Portuguese.
It's fine.
So welcome in Lisbon.
Thank you.
We are very pleased to have you here, sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us. I have to start for the first question, why you are not a feminist?
Yeah, I spent so many years hearing that word be misused and misappropriated by women who wanted to just sort of get more money, from corporate employers. Who just wanted to wear a T-shirt and align themselves with the revolutionary movement. And I just thought that it had been so drained of any meaning or power that it originally had that maybe it was just time to abandon the word. Just leave it to the girls who just want to, donate 20 cents to Planned Parenthood with their nail polish purchases and just sort of start something else on the side.
And what is something else?
Well, I personally am a very sort of 19th century anarchist, so that's sort of where my energy is at the moment.
And what does that mean for our public?
The sort of anarchist movement of the 19th century was very much about abolishment of institutions so that we could have actual individual freedom. So the abolishment of marriage, the abolishment of capitalism, the abolishment of the church, which is not to say that we shouldn't have love, which doesn't mean we shouldn't have a feeling for God. It just means that these institutions, which have been a method of control for so many years, for so many centuries, should be gotten rid of and allow us to trust people that they kind of know what's good for them.
But would you accept that there is... do you think there is a huge inequality between men and women in some countries?
Oh, of course.
I have to ask this comparing the countries, because of course, naturally, Brazil and India are not US or Scandinavia.
Sure.
But concerning Europe, Central Europe, or Western Europe, where we are, do you think this gap is growing, or we are better than we were
Well, I think that
decades
there
ago?
are like very obvious things that you can point to that are progress, as far as income inequality, as far as abortion rights, although that keeps sliding back and forth. But it's the basic premise of most feminist civil rights movements is not the reformation of the state or the church or the city or whatever it is that they're fighting against. It is about inclusion within those systems. So those systems which are built expressly for oppression, we'll just find somebody else to oppress. I mean, so while we had feminism, and so now that we have women sort of running corporations, we have women running countries, we still have massive income inequality. We still have massive discrimination against refugees, against racial minorities, religious minorities. So inclusion doesn't necessarily lead to progress. That, to me, is the sort of fundamental error at the heart of the feminist project as it exists right now.
I have to ask you something. Today I was reading an article of someone also criticizing this intersectionalism and feminism, saying that in Oxford there was no identity card to go to the university, but now they have a rainbow card. But the process of having a rainbow card means they have a card, which they didn't have before. So
Sure.
now they have to show their identity, which nobody had to do before. And the author, it was published in Critique, Journal of Socialist Studies, criticized this approach towards the state. So that the state can regulate all the relations in a way that can become totalitarian, or if not
Sure.
totalitarian, at least extremely control.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the sort of civil rights movements, including gay civil rights, women's civil rights, racial minority civil rights, is about acceptance by the state, which in and of itself is problematic. I mean, let's take the example of the fight for the ability to get married if you are homosexual, which has been successful in many countries over just the past couple of years. But essentially what you are doing is expanding an exclusive contract. You are expanding slightly the notion of who is included in an unfair, unjust distribution of rights. Because marriage in almost every single country comes with all of these rights and benefits that are not allowed to be distributed to people who are unmarried. So now I guess it's fine because if you're gay, but also if you're sort of psychologically sound enough to maintain a stable relationship and also attractive enough to attract a mate and all of these other sort of things that come with being able to get married, well, then you now get access to these rights. But it leaves out a growing population of people who just don't or can't get married because of various reasons, because of poverty, because of unattractiveness, because of the profound instability of romantic relationships in our culture. All of these things are sort of dismantling what was at the beginning, a kind of pure intentioned fight for rights.
What is your relation with romantic love and romantic relations?
Well, heterosexuality is a nightmare, so I just feel like that's a good place to start. But also, when we're talking about how do we create a sort of more fair society, what we essentially need to do is create a society. Most of our countries are aligned or arranged in this way of privileging the couple or the nuclear family, right? And marriage and family is a way of just sort of consolidating capital. You share your money, you share your care, your attention to a very select few number of people based on genetic material and circumstance and romance, right? And so that limits our empathy toward anybody else, basically. Like once we have these sort of separate out little units and we have the limited number of people that we actually care about and are obligated to care about and obligated to share our resources with, then everybody else just looks like, like an invader, like somebody just trying to take from you. The idea of a society where we actually feel and live up to the obligation that we have to take care of each other, like that is an actual radical idea that hasn't been around for a while.
But if we look back, for example, to the beginnings of the women's rights, I'm thinking of Alexandra Kollontai. Mm-hmm. We see a much different approach.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The approach of free love against the state, etc. So how did we reach... so Camille Paglia, for example, she gives the example of 68 in France, the May of 68. Mm-hmm. We were fighting to the right to sleep with our boyfriends because the universities were separated and there could be no night... night dates during the day they could be together but not during the night. Mm-hmm. And now there are movements in certain areas of the world that ask for separate places for men and women.
Sure, yeah.
What happened since 68 until nowadays?
Yeah, well, essentially one of the problems with any sort of fight for a series of rights is that assimilation becomes easier. So you are in a state of marginalization and certain things are being denied to you. At some point, the larger state or group realizes it's just easier if we just ask them to behave themselves in a very specific way and then they can be included in the distribution of rights, which is essentially what happened with women. It's like, well, if you behave like men, if you work in the capitalist system, if you respect our institutions in these particular ways, like we'll let you into them and we'll let you benefit from them. But that requires you to just cut out so much of your soul. But yeah, so the first wave feminists who were insane. I mean, they were throwing bombs, they were going on hunger strikes, they were fighting for free love, they were fighting for the abolishment of Christianity. Like that, when you have zero rights, that's kind of a comfortable position to take because you have nothing to lose, right? What are they going to do? They take away even, the small things that you do have? It doesn't matter. But once you start to get comfortable, once you start to get a couple things, once you start to get your own money, once you start to get property, you're like, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, it's maybe not so bad. Like, I'm sorry, like maybe we took it too far. We'll calm down now. You can do whatever you want. But then, now that people are asking for segregation between men and women, it's like, well, being around men who haven't learned, all of them, not to abuse us sucks. And so we realize maybe we do still need some of these protections.
I have to come to this obvious question. What do you think of Me Too movement?
Well, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. Pursuing a goal of having men not harass and abuse us is a good one. I don't think that that's actually the intention behind the Me Too movement. I think it's mostly being abused as a power grab by women. Because you see things like, for example, there's this organization in America called Time's Up, which came out of the Me Too movement. It's a nonprofit. They've raised millions of dollars. It's based out of Hollywood. They have all these celebrity women involved with it. And they make a big deal about they are going to fund legal action against against employers for sexual harassment and abuse. They have not done that. And when there was a nationwide walkout of women workers of McDonald's because McDonald's was refusing to take sexual harassment claims seriously, Time's Up had nothing to do with it. Like Me Too, none of the sort of Me Too writers covered it in the media.
Problem?
Oh, it's absolutely a class problem. Like Me Too is primarily focused on politics, Hollywood, journalism. That's it. Like that's where the primary cases are happening. That's where all the focus is. They don't care about fast food workers. They don't care about domestic workers, right? They really just care about their own situation and their own level of power. And I find that very troubling. I also find it very troubling that nobody seems to believe in due process anymore, that it's become this very extrajudicial system of, well, he's accused, and so there have to be repercussions immediately. I find that worrying, and I also find it worrying that when you say due process, everyone gets angry at you, like they're acting like you are being unreasonable. That, to me, is very troubling.
Do you think there is political rights are in danger when these judgments are made in newspapers and not in courts with testimonies and regular processes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem of access. I mean, who has access to mass media? Only rich white women, right, for the most part. And so already you're having like a imbalance of who is allowed to have justice. But then, like, if somebody is sort of shamed in this public way, and then loses a job or loses credibility or whatever, then how do we rehabilitate that person? In a court system, punishment is doled out in proportion to the offense, theoretically. I mean, we all know the judicial system is broken almost everywhere, but theoretically, punishment is proportionate to the offense. But then after the punishment is over, there's supposed to be rehabilitation. If there's no sentence of punishment, if nobody says, okay, for 3 years or whatever, you have to do this in order to atone and to restore your credibility, then when does that person come back? Like, is he just banned forever from public life? Is he, or is it just like when he can get a PR team together that can sort of rehabilitate his image via the same sort of media circles? It's not helpful. It's basically distributing both justice and punishment in this way of who has the best sort of PR team and legal representation and access to these very sort of limited forums, and I just don't think it helps anything.
Do you think, how shall I ask this question in order, I don't want to put you my words on this question, but there is a notion in this new wave of feminism, generalized, of course, probably there are exceptions, women appear always as victims. Mm-hmm. And that seems to me highly problematic because, for example, if women they have all the heavy reproduction work to do, mm-hmm. This means they are mainly educating the boys that are becoming machos or sure. Whatever. Yeah. So it doesn't seem to me that this victim position, it looks a little bit simplistic for sure. The amount of complexity that there are on the relations. At the same time, we are speaking here comfortable in a country where we are not in danger, but if we go to Brazil or even to India, we are seeing situations where basic freedom for women to move without a huge danger of being harmed happen. So how do you see this? Because it seems, my question, I really want to give you the floor, is we cannot accept to be victims when we are also responsible. But at the same time, when we speak about world feminism, we are putting in the same place situations that are totally different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the conversation about complicity in these sort of systems of abuse, I mean, we have not even begun to have that conversation of how we prop up abusers. I had this unbearable moment last night. I went to go see a literary panel, and it was all very, cultured and high-minded until, for whatever reason, a woman on the panel who is in control of one of the most powerful literary magazines in the world started talking about Lauren Stein, who was the editor-in-chief of the Paris Review and who was removed from power because of essentially like 10 to 15 years of unfettered sexual assault on various women writers. And he was protected and coddled by everyone in the literature community, especially like people in power, like this particular woman. And she was trying to put it off, trying to diminish the things that he had done, even though, even 12 years ago, somebody pulled me aside and was like, don't ever be alone with this person, don't ever get in a taxi with him, just protect yourself. And there was always this sort of like whispering about him. But, probably he found her very charming. They work well together, and so she's going to protect him. And then, so it's just like this situation of women participate in the same systems of abuse that men do. I mean, obviously not always in the same amount, but we do, because it's been convenient for us, because it helps us gain our own level of power and money and attention. And then, so an easy way to deflect blame on that is to just take this sort of victimhood position, to just say, well, I'm a victim too, and then, no, you're not allowed to be questioned. So I don't know, like, it's so complicated. And in America, this emphasis on who did what and when, and just calling it out person by person, rather than looking at the system that allows these people to have unquestioned power over entire industries, is really, it's very frustrating that the conversation just seems to always land back on this person is a bad person, this person is not a bad person, this person is a victim. Obviously, it's incredibly complicated, and we should have complicated conversations about it.
In Brazil, there are several places where this happened, but there is a specific one of the biggest universities in Brazil, where women have fixed a white paper and wrote in each door, write the name of your abuser here. So all the teachers that go to work have to see this. In my opinion, I was there, it has created kind of a psychology of fear. Everybody is against everybody, and nobody believes nobody. And the relations became terrifically stressed in this environment. The argument of the Brazilian feminists to do this is the judicial system doesn't work.
Right.
So we have to do this kind of public justice. That doesn't work as well, because we are condemned innocent people. So
sure, yeah.
how we solve this?
Well, if the system that is really not even built for this, I mean, the judicial system, which is based on evidence, is not going to be great for interpersonal conflict, right? Where it's a he said, she said. How do you for the most part, these things are always going to fall back on the presumption of innocence because it has to. Like, we can't just start weighing the word of women heavier than the word of men, because that just leads to, that's how lynching happened in America. A white woman would say a black man raped her, and so the black man was strung up from a tree. That's how all the sort of like satanic panic cases happened of women saying that their fathers raped them because they had recovered memories, and they didn't. So we can't just start saying, well, believe women, because that's a very sort of trendy thing to say. So if the judicial system doesn't work, and it can't be fixed and without changing the very nature of it, then set up a different system. Like, there have been feminists who have been talking about a sort of like truth and reconciliation type project. There are feminists who have founded restorative justice tribunals where you just sit down and you have a conversation with your accuser, right? Like, and there's no expectation of jail time or whatever, so you can just have a conversation about what happened and give you each other's perspective. These things are on the table, they're in use in small ways, but they're not going to be adopted widespread because it's more convenient to just sort of claim this position of victimhood and then complain about the judicial system, or keep it in a situation where accusations can just be made arbitrarily and you can take down your enemy without anything happening, which has happened. I mean, these cases have been documented, so it's not like, when you say something like that, the immediate accusation is that you're a misogynist of some kind. And if you're a woman, you've internalized misogyny. But there have been cases of this, of women lying to take people down.
This week, a man was released from that corridor. He was 30 years arrested in US because they managed to have the fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And he was condemned just based on she recognized him.
It happens all of the time. Yeah.
It astonished me that in the debate of feminism, where there is no complexity, mm-hmm. I suppose I totally agree on this. We are always speaking about abuse. Mm-hmm. From talk to a rape. Mm-hmm. And this is something that surprised me a lot. And we had the French manifesto led by Catherine Deneuve.
Sure, yeah.
Saying clearly we have to distinguish what is a rape from what is touching.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Because you were speaking about abuse, mm-hmm. and we tend to do this. We mm-hmm. speak about abuse, putting in the same plate mm-hmm. things that are qualitatively different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think part of the problem with this sort of flattening out of the difference between abuse and, say, like unwanted touch or unwanted attention and these sorts of things is that immediately making the jump to these accusations doesn't help educate men. There's been like this shift of what's appropriate for social behavior and what's inappropriate social behavior happened very fast. And the rules are always changing. There has to be a conversation with men to explain, here is how you are now expected to behave, and these are the reasons why. There can't just be this jump to outrage. And I understand the jump to outrage. Like, I understand, like, biting your tongue for 20 years and then finally just screaming at the person who, brushes up against you accidentally and you just take it out on that person. I get it. But it's not fair. And so I feel like so much of the sort of leftist rhetoric about abusers, about racists, about transphobic, about, whatever. They've put in these standards, and there's no actual conversation with the people that they are against, right? There's no outreach, there's no education, it's just a sort of flat refusal. So that to me is not productive. I don't think that shame is a great motivator. I don't think calling somebody an idiot is a good motivator. I don't think that helps sort of engage the person in conversation. But it's just these hardline positions again and again and again, with not giving anybody the time to catch up.
I want to make you this question is the most difficult question I want to make for a long time. Never did it in public. Because you realize why. Sex is also about being, all sexual relations are in part wild, an animal. It doesn't matter as far as we are civilized and with love. And there is sometimes a gray line between being strong and being violent. How, if we continue in a way that the state regulates all relations, don't we jump to the possibility of desexualizing the relations?
Well, in America, this is happening primarily on universities. It hasn't made a jump into a sort of larger legal system, but the idea of enthusiastic consent, that any sort of form of sexual contact is rape or abuse unless it was enthusiastically consented to. And that
what is enthusiastically consent? You have to
dance? No one knows. Like, are you supposed, like, sparklers, or like, you sing a song? I don't know. But and that's also part of this, is like taking all this gray language and trying to put it into like a system of justice is a really, it's not a good way to go. I don't think consent is a great way to think about these issues. I think that's a very sort of like consumerist approach to sex, of like, I'm going to choose these things off the menu and agree to them, but don't, do anything that's not off that. Also, but this, because it's happening on a university level, these are 22-year-olds, or I guess not, that would be like 19-year-olds. These are like 19-year-olds who are probably just trying to protect themselves a lot, because teenage girls are fed with all this information constantly from their parents, from TV, from society, of like, all men want to rape you. And so there's a level of fear. So they're trying to negotiate it, and I understand that. But these ideas I don't think are transferable. I don't think they're great. A lot of times they're coming from professors in women's studies groups, which I find troubling, because adults shouldn't think this way. But yeah, like, who wants to have sex under fluorescent lights? Like, who wants to have, like, okay, and then 7 minutes into it, this is going to happen now. It's like with trigger warnings, it's just with, safe spaces and these sorts of things. It's a very sort of consumerist approach to life, of like, I only want these things that I choose to happen to me. And life is chaotic and crazy, and sex is chaotic and crazy. That doesn't mean men should use this as an excuse to cross boundaries and do whatever they want. But again, like, this is a conversation that needs to happen. I think people are just trying to skip steps of go straight to regulation, go straight to sort of putting things in law, rather than having really difficult conversations with your sexual partners. Or with your family, or with the Trump voter that's in your neighborhood, or whatever. These things don't get solved by regulation. They get solved by understanding one another.
But to understand one another, we have to have relations with one another.
Yes.
And the last 20 years, we saw a huge, change in the patterns of relations, especially probably in the last 10 years, that are already being studied by neurologists, sociologists, even historians, which is the amount of people that do not relate themselves, including the children in school, because they relate with a ecran, with a cell phone or with a computer.
Yeah.
How do you think this will, you have a pessimistic approach to this, an optimistic approach? Because you was continue speaking about let's speak each other, let's speak with each other.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we do this less and less and less.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing of like the safe spaces and the consent thing. It's like, I only want to have a conversation with people who are going to agree with me, right? Like, so you create this sort of social realm, online and offline, where you only talk to people who agree with you on the exact same issues. So you're constantly like reinforcing each other, never challenging each other, and you just assume that you're right about everything and you figured everything out and everybody else is insane. It's just not healthy, it's not productive. I don't know if it gets any better. I think it has to if anything is going to change. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not the most optimistic person in the world, so.
You have so strong positions about these questions that you have developed here with us, including that we are in the danger of losing basic rights, political rights, etc. We are in danger of desexualizing relations, trying to regulate everything. We are in danger of free of expression, free of relation, all serious things. Don't you think this is serious enough to fight it in a most collective, organized way? Or shall we just say, this is... I realize myself, I have to give you my own example, because I've been a lot in Brazil, where there is a similar situation to US. And one of these days, I even saw women defending that certain men should not be quoted in theses because in the past they were condemned by domestic violence. So we have to have a kind of index of the books, including the men. And I realize myself in a position that maybe it's not enough to be critical. I have to be a militant against this, because the society is in danger if this continues. Don't you have that feeling? Because your contribution is, of course, public contribution, very important, but don't you think that should be more, because at this time it looks that just the extreme right is fighting this. Don't you see this danger?
The most dangerous thing, I think, is that the only counterculture that we have is the alt-right. It's the fascists and the Nazis. You know, back in the 60s, you had this understanding that society was sick. And so you had this sort of bohemian revolution against it, where you could live your life in a different way outside of society. But because everyone then turned their fight toward joining society, assimilating into society, if you were gay, if you were a woman, if you were black, if you were Muslim, whatever, like looking to the society to bestow acceptance upon you, the idea of an alternative life has been lost. So the only sort of like alternative to this sort of capitalist life, to this sort of hardline, this is the correct language and this is the incorrect language, all this sort of political correctness that sort of invaded our culture, is Nazis. Like, that's a community. They love you there. They take care of each other. They support each other. Feminists don't support each other. I mean, we don't have feminist collectives anymore. We don't have a sense of community. We just have, a T-shirt. So I think it's really dangerous for somebody who's like a 16-year-old boy who's angry and he doesn't know why or who he should be angry at. And then you have this community of people who aren't just going to tell him who to be angry at, which are, you know, immigrants and whatever. They're going to take care of him. They're going to give him a sense of belonging. And if that belonging doesn't exist anywhere else, and it kind of doesn't, then how are we supposed to fight against that?
Yes, so we are running out of time, but I want to ask you a question on you as a writer. How you became a writer? How is this experience? And tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, it was kind of an accident. So I was working at a feminist nonprofit in Texas in the United States. And on the side, I started a literary magazine because I was bored. And I had an internet connection. It accidentally became extremely successful and took over my entire life. So I sort of was thrust into the literary world, but while retaining a kind of, you know, radical feminist viewpoint while within it. You know, those years of working as an educator and as an abortion counselor were so formative to my political understanding of the world that that's always going to be kind of with me.
You reach the anarchism during these years, or you have family influence or other persons in your life important that leads you there?
My family is very conservative, very traditional.
So that was a big contribution for you to become an anarchist, to have a conservative family, maybe.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, if you grew up in rural Kansas, the only act of rebellion that you can think of is anarchy. So,
what are your projects at the moment?
I write opinion pieces for The Guardian on a regular basis, but I'm trying to finish a book about basically, like, if we are going, you know, I hate this sort of feminist rhetoric of like dismantle the patriarchy and build something new. It's like, okay, build what? Like, if we don't have an idea of what we're going to build to replace patriarchy, then we're just going to recreate it in some way. We're just going to recreate hierarchy. So it's essentially like, if we are dismantling these sort of like patriarchal support systems, like family and a monotheistic patriarchal God and these sorts of things, and how do we rethink those institutions? Like, people are still, even if we sort of destroy the church because the church is corrupt and money hungry and so on, people still have a religious feeling. So how do we guide that in a way that's not into a patriarchal institution? And, you know, sort of looking through the history of both feminism and anarchism and socialism for ideas on this, because it's not like people haven't thought about this before, but the more radical thinkers of feminism are the first ones to have been forgotten. So it's just sort of about restoring those ideas and taking them further.
Which of them are important for you, these first radical socialist thinkers or feminists?
Victoria Woodhull, who was the first woman to run for president of the United States. She was a former sex worker. She wanted to abolish marriage. She believed in free love. She's been a very interesting thinker. Emma Goldman, the Russian anarchist, I absolutely adore. And Shulamith Firestone, the second wave feminist, who... well, I mean, one of her duty was to destroy the nuclear family. These women are very serious thinkers, but for the most part, they've been sort of maligned and treated as if they were crazy. But their ideas they still stand up.
Thank you so much. I want to give the floor to our public. If you want to do the question in Portuguese, I can translate it in my broken English. or you can do it directly in English.
Mm-hmm.
How are men reacting to your opinions?
Not always great. I get some crazy emails sometimes, and then also like there's also a segment of men who think that because I'm criticizing feminism that I agree with them, that feminists are crazy and that women are insane. So that's also a problem. So not great. I haven't had a lot of intelligent conversations with men on the subjects that I sort of write about.
But don't you think that they becoming more afraid of women because of our ideas? And
Yes.
if one half of the population becomes afraid of the other, how are the relationships going to develop harmoniously? They are not.
Yeah, no, they're not. But there's such a dug-in response to, and I understand it, and it happens every time. I mean, when slavery started to be abolished, white people freaked out, and they didn't want to, and they still don't want to listen to black people. So anytime you're sort of challenged on the level of power that you have, you're going to have a difficult response to it. So I see it more of a failing of men than I believe that a lot of the sort of feminist rhetoric is not inviting, and it has skipped some steps. But for the most part, I think we're in a part of the society, we're in this time in the society where men should figure out this isn't going backward again. It is kind of their job to catch up and understand what the anger is all about. And I think for the most part, they think that I don't need to pay attention to it. Like, I'm fine. And so I do see it as their particular failing.
I think there is a little part of failing on the side of us women, because who brings up men?
Mm-hmm.
Women,
Sure.
From birth.
Yeah.
And we have such a strong influence. And if we did that job better,
Yeah.
maybe there would not be so much violence against women too. I don't know if I am too optimistic on that, but...
Yeah, I do think that, we still deal with issues of like little boys being told they're not supposed to cry, and that sort of creates these moments of aggression where men aren't allowed to have emotions other than anger, right? And weirdly, that conversation is not happening with women, I don't think. Like when we talk about feminism, we generally talk about what society has done to us rather than how we have participated in a society that does this.
Yes.
And I think that is a big failing of feminism, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you give the floor to this sir, please? Thank you.
I have another question. At some point you said something about impressionist societies, and could you please elaborate a bit on the concept? And does that have something to do with the politically correct tendency that we have now?
I'm sorry, what was it? What societies?
Impressionist societies. I believe you said something about impressionist societies. I'm not sure I got the concept.
Do you know what I said?
Consegue-me traduzir? Eu não percebi também.
Falou em sociedades impressionistas. Deu a ideia que a impressão que se causa, a imagem é mais importante do que o conteúdo.
Society is very based on first impressions, not where complexity is not,
Oh, sure.
or
Yeah.
strong relations, but based on consumption and very fashionable. As far as if I'm
Yeah.
well translating your idea.
Yeah,
Every state on Facebook is more important than
Yeah.
thing.
yeah.
What you tell journalists is more important than how you act.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also this is kind of like obviously there's a sort of public self and a private self. and the divide between that is, I think, growing. There's especially online, so there's just id online, and then you can be an actual sort of respectable, decent human being in your private life. But to sort of assume that this sort of forceful conversation that happens online of divisions, of this is who I am and my identity and this is my belief system, and then you just yell at each other online, like that's not, I don't think that's how people are. I don't think that that's how people exist. I don't think that it gets at the complexity of what people believe, and that we use these sort of labels like feminist and whatever, essentially to create more divisions rather than to create more common ground, because it becomes like this sort of like weird litmus test of like, if you don't claim this specific label for yourself of feminist or liberal or conservative or whatever, then it's like, well, I don't have to talk to you because you're obviously like not my people. And I think that's just I just don't think it's a productive way to live.
Thank you. Please, sir. Yes.
Vou falar em português.
À vontade.
Há um anúncio em português que ficou muito conhecido, no qual dizia que há uma linha que separa. Na sociedade há várias linhas que separam. Basicamente, há de facto, inclusive algumas que chamamos o bas-fond, ou seja, fora da sociedade. Eu estou a falar, nomeadamente, de pessoas que estão sujeitas a abusos e que, de facto, geralmente, na maior parte das vezes, não têm qualquer proteção legal. Ou seja, estou a falar dos trabalhadores do sexo, que, em grande parte, de facto, são mulheres. E são mulheres que, de facto, arriscam, que não têm direitos, podem ser, inclusivamente, abusadas pelas próprias autoridades. E não vejo muito os movimentos feministas, de facto, lutarem ou defenderem por essa, de facto, linha que separa.
The question is concerning sex workers who are particularly abused and systematically abused even by authorities, and the feminist movement don't defend these workers. What do you think about this line?
Yeah, I mean,
that separates.
I think that's sort of like a holdout from like second wave feminism that saw pornography and sex work as only objectification, only degradation of women. But sex work is work. And we have to, if we actually care about the most vulnerable women in our society, then we have to talk about how we protect sex workers, which is decriminalization. Like, it's the only thing that makes sense. Because if you're being sort of targeted by abusers and serial killers and also the police, like, you literally have nowhere to turn. So decriminalizing sex work, we can all sort of, feminists who are against sex work can imagine a world where sex work doesn't exist, and that's nice, but we live in a society that does, so we need to protect vulnerable women.
Muito obrigada. Não sei se há mais alguma questão que queiram. Diga.
A consequence of capitalism as we have it now, like consuming sex.
Well, I think so, but I think that there will also be sex work under socialism. Like, I think there's always going to be sex workers in some sort of form. I don't think that it won't exist as it currently exists, which is primarily men profiting off of the sexualization of women's bodies. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that necessarily there is I don't think that we have a world, we can even build a world where everyone is so sexually satisfied that they never have any sort of needs. I mean, I have sex workers for friends, and it's a lot of lonely people who need sex workers. Like, if nobody wants to touch you, like, it's nice to have it available that you can pay somebody to touch you. It is a basic human need. So I'm not advocating for more sex work, but again, I don't know, why not? It should be maybe it should be subsidized by the government. I don't know. If we're going to really protect the workers, we should just have government-run brothels, maybe.
Não sei se há mais alguma questão, mas já estamos a ficar a chegar ao final do nosso tempo. Obrigada a todos pela vossa presença e espero que tenham aproveitado esta conversa tão interessante. Thank you so much, Jessa, for
Thank
this
you.
such interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As próximas conversas com História vão ser no dia 24 de maio, com o escritor Leonardo Padura. Vai ser em castelhano. E depois, no dia 6 de junho, o Bispo Carlos Azevedo, que está agora responsável pelo património do Vaticano. São muito bem-vindos a se juntarem a nós nessa altura. Muito obrigada pela vossa presença.